The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, The Boscombe Valley Mystery. The familiar sitting room at 221B Baker Street was thick with the comfortable silence of a London morning, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rustle of Dr. Watson's newspaper. He glanced over the top of the page at his friend, Sherlock Holmes, who was a caged tiger in their shared space. Holmes paced relentlessly, his long, thin frame a blur of nervous energy. "Watson, this idleness will be the death of me," he declared, stopping abruptly to stare out the rain-streaked window. "My mind is an engine that rusts from disuse. I crave a challenge, a labyrinth of facts to navigate." As if on cue, a soft knock at the door preceded their landlady's maid, who entered bearing a single, stark yellow telegram on a silver salver. Holmes snatched the telegram from the tray with a hawk-like swiftness. He ripped open the flimsy envelope, his fingers surprisingly steady. As his eyes devoured the terse message, Watson could see the fog of ennui lift from his friend's features, replaced by the sharp, electric glint of the hunt. "Ah, Watson, the game is afoot," he cried, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "It is a plea from our beleaguered friend, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. A country gentleman, Mr. Charles McCarthy, has been brutally murdered in the rural tranquility of Boscombe Valley. The local constabulary believes they have their man, the victim's own son. But Lestrade, bless his conventional mind, senses a tangle he cannot unravel." "The official theory is simple, almost insultingly so," Holmes continued, already shrugging into his traveling coat. "But there is a complication, a human element, that throws a wrench in the works. The accused, a young man named James, is engaged to be married. His fiancée, a Miss Alice Turner, is passionately convinced of his innocence. It is her desperate appeal that has prompted Lestrade to seek my assistance. It suggests a depth to the affair the police have overlooked. Watson, pack your bag and your service revolver. We depart for Herefordshire on the Paddington Express immediately." Without a moment's hesitation, Watson set aside his paper, his heart quickening with the familiar thrill of a new adventure. As the Great Western Railway carried them swiftly through a patchwork of green fields and sleepy villages, Holmes was a study in concentration. He had procured a detailed ordnance map of the Boscombe Valley and was poring over it with a magnifying glass, his brow furrowed. "The victim, Charles McCarthy," he began without looking up, "was an expatriate from Australia who made his fortune there. He and his son, James, lived as tenants on the Hatherley farm. The preliminary reports Lestrade sent over suggest a history of friction between father and son, disagreements over money, the future, the usual domestic tempests. But murder, Watson, that is a storm of a different magnitude." The market town of Ross-on-Wye was damp and grey when they disembarked. Inspector Lestrade, looking every bit the bulldog of Scotland Yard in his thick tweed suit, was waiting for them on the platform. "Holmes, thank heavens you've come," he said, his handshake firm but his expression fraught with worry. "On the surface, it's an open and shut case. We have a witness who overheard a violent argument between James McCarthy and his father right by the pool. Minutes later, the son is seen running from the spot, and the father is found with his skull crushed. But there are inconsistencies, things that don't quite fit the neat picture." A short carriage ride brought them to a secluded and somewhat gloomy spot. A dark, still pond, known locally as Boscombe Pool, was fringed by a dense stand of trees and reeds. The air was heavy, with the smell of damp earth. "This is the place," Lestrade announced, his voice low. "The body was discovered by a gamekeeper's daughter, lying face down right on this patch of turf. The local surgeon confirms death was caused by multiple blows to the occipital bone from a large, rough stone. We found one nearby, covered in blood." While Lestrade recounted the official facts, Holmes was already on the move, his entire being transformed into an instrument of observation. He dropped to his hands and knees, seemingly oblivious to the mud, his magnifying glass sweeping over the churned-up ground. He was a human bloodhound, casting back and forth on a scent invisible to others. "Watson, come here," he murmured, his voice tight with discovery. He pointed a long, bony finger at the damp earth. "Observe. We have two distinct sets of footprints leading to the water's edge. One, belonging to a large man, with thick-soled, square-toed boots, our victim, Charles McCarthy. The other, a younger man in more fashionable round-toed boots, his son, James. So far, this corroborates the police theory. Holmes continued his meticulous crawl around the pool's perimeter, his eyes missing no detail. After examining the blood-stained stone Lestrade had indicated, his gaze fell upon something half-hidden in the reeds. "And this, Inspector?" he asked, rising and holding up a damp gray piece of cloth. "Did your men find this?" "It was a traveling cloak, of a common type. We overlooked it," Lestrade admitted gruffly. Holmes examined it briefly before turning his attention back to the ground. "Curious," he mused. "The son claims he saw no one, yet here is a cloak that belongs to neither him nor his father. And the murder weapon. It's a piece of local sandstone, heavy and jagged. It would have taken considerable force." They were shown into the drawing room of a grand country house, the home of Miss Alice Turner. She was a young woman of remarkable poise, though the strain of the past few days was evident in the pallor of her skin and the dark circles beneath her eyes. She met Holmes's intense gaze without flinching. "Mr. Holmes, I am grateful you have come," she said, her voice steady. "The police are convinced of James's guilt, but they are wrong. James has a temper, it is true, and he and his father often disagreed, but he is not capable of this. He loved Mr. McCarthy, despite their difficulties. There is a deeper, darker story here, and I implore you to find it." Alice went on to explain the long-standing connection between the two families. "My father, John Turner, and Mr. McCarthy were old friends, their bond forged many years ago in the goldfields of Australia. They were closer than brothers. That is what makes this so dreadful." A shadow crossed her face. "My father's health has been failing for some time," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He suffers from a weak heart and the shock of his friend's death and James's arrest. It has taken a terrible toll. He is confined to his room." The local constabulary's jail was a grim, cold place. James McCarthy sat on the edge of a narrow cot in his cell, his head in his hands, the picture of despair. He looked up as they entered, his eyes wild with fear and grief. "It's true," we argued, he admitted, his voice cracking. "My father, he was pressuring me about things, about my engagement to Alice. He had a hold over her father, and he was using it. I couldn't stand it. I told him I would leave, that I would go my own way. I turned my back on him and walked away. He was alive and well when I left him. Then I heard that terrible cry. I ran back, and he was lying there." Holmes's voice was gentle, but probing. "As you returned to the pool, Mr. McCarthy, did you see anyone? Anything at all?" James furrowed his brow, trying to pierce the fog of his memory. "It all happened so fast. I was in a state of shock, but as I broke through the trees, I had the distinct impression of something. A flash of gray, vanishing into the woods on the far side of the pool. It could have been a deer, but it looked like a man's cloak. It was just a fleeting glimpse." Holmes and Watson exchanged a meaningful look, the gray cloak found in the reeds. Holmes leaned closer to the bars, his expression one of intense concentration. "Think carefully, Mr. McCarthy. This may be of the utmost importance. As you were walking away, before you heard the final cry, did your father call out anything to you?" James looked perplexed. "He was very angry. He shouted after me, but it was just one word, a strange one. I couldn't make sense of it. It sounded like he was calling me a rat." A sudden, sharp light flared in Holmes's eyes. It was the spark of a connection, a key turning in a complex lock. As they walked away from the jail, the damp chill of the street seemed to go unnoticed by Holmes, who was radiating an inner heat of intellectual excitement. "Watson, did you hear it?" he asked, his voice vibrating with energy. "A rat! The boy thinks it was an insult. But his father was an Australian. What if it was not an English word, but a name from his past? Not a rat, Watson, but Ballarat, the famous Australian gold mining city, the place where both McCarthy and Turner made their fortunes. The entire case pivots on that single misheard word. Their final call was back at the Grand House, but this time they were ushered upstairs to a darkened, stuffy sick room. Propped up on a mountain of pillows in a vast four-poster bed was John Turner. He was a shrunken, fragile figure, his skin the color of old parchment, and his breath coming in shallow rasps. The air was heavy with the scent of medicine. Holmes approached the bed, his manner respectful but his purpose clear. "Mr. Turner," he said, his voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight of authority, "I have come to ask you to tell me the complete truth of the events at Boscombe Pool." A flicker of fear ignited in the old man's weary eyes. He wheezed, clutching the blankets to his chin, protesting that he was a sick man, confined to his bed, and knew nothing of the events. Holmes did not raise his voice. He calmly and methodically laid out the undeniable truth, that Turner had left the house on the day of the murder wearing his grey travelling cloak, that he had met Charles McCarthy at the pool for a prearranged meeting, and that the name Ballarat was not just a city, but a memory of a time when Turner was a highwayman in Australia. Holmes concluded by stating what he knew to be the motive. McCarthy was using this dark secret to blackmail him. The old man's facade crumbled completely. A dry, racking sob escaped his lips, and he sank back into the pillows. A broken man. The story tumbled out, a torrent of guilt and fear held back for decades. He confessed to his past in Australia as a member of a notorious gang of bushrangers. Charles McCarthy, a man he had trusted, had been their coach driver, the one who tipped them off to transports of gold. Turner had escaped, made a new fortune honestly, and sought refuge in a respectable English life. But years later, McCarthy, dissolute and greedy, had tracked him down, holding his past over him like a sword. His demands grew and grew. Turner wept, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. His final price for silence was that my Alice, my only child, should marry his boy James, thereby securing my fortune for his line. I could not let my daughter be shackled to the son of such a villain. I agreed to meet him one last time at the pool. I offered him everything I had to leave us in peace. He refused. He became enraged, called me by my old name, and raised his hand to strike me. In a moment of pure terror, I grabbed a stone from the ground and struck him. I only meant to defend myself, I swear it. "I saw him fall," Turner whispered, his voice barely audible. I panicked. I ran, not even realizing I had dropped my cloak in my haste. I hid in the woods, my heart pounding in my chest, and I watched. I saw young James return. I saw his horror and his grief as he found his father's body. I knew the boy was innocent, that he would be blamed. But I was a coward. I was terrified of the gallows, of my daughter learning the truth about her father. My silence has been a torment, far worse than any prison. Holmes listened to the end of the tragic confession in silence. His expression was not one of condemnation, but of a deep, somber understanding. He looked at the dying old man, a prisoner of his own past. "Mr. Turner, you must sign this confession," Holmes said gently, "and Dr. Watson will witness it. I will hold it in reserve." He knew Turner did not have long to live. He also knew that Charles McCarthy was a blackmailer who had met a violent end of his own making. He would present the evidence of a third party at the scene, the cloak, the misheard cry, to the authorities, enough to secure James's release without needing to expose the dying man's secret. True justice, Holmes reflected as they prepared for their journey back to London, was a far more nuanced and compassionate thing than the rigid letter of the law.